I'm Rebecca Johnson.
I'm Andy Behbakht.
And we made a Superheroic podcast network.
Welcome to I Made This from Do Anything Media, a show about passionate people executing their big ideas in realistic ways you can learn from to make your own big idea a reality. I'm Bill Meeks, and today I'm talking with my good friends Andy and Rebecca from DCTV Podcasts. DCTV Podcast, if you don't know, is a podcast network made up of shows that cover TV shows based on characters from the DC universe, like Superman, Batman, well, actually, Supergirl, Batwoman, Doom Patrol, all of it. Now, I've known Rebecca and Andy for several years, and even used to host a podcast that was part of DCTV Podcast. The show was called Legends of Gotham, and it covered Gotham on Fox. A quick note about the interview. This was recorded before the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover, so a few comments might feel a little dated. But I thought it would be a good time to release the episode since I'm releasing a new book about fan podcasting very, very soon, like within the next couple weeks. It's called The Complete Guide to Fan Podcasting, and it'll be out in digital and paperback very, very soon. You can even get a free copy by signing up for the mailing list at our company website, doanything.media. Now, we're going to have some more Fancast-related content over the next few weeks to support the book, so stay tuned. But for today, we'll be chatting about what it takes to run a podcast network, particularly within a niche like TV shows set in the DC Comics universe that's ever expanding. We even talk a little bit about how podcasting makes you vulnerable, and how that vulnerability opens you up to deep connections with other people. Plus, we fight over Bobby Hawk, one of my favorite listeners of all time. Okay, I made this for you. Take a listen. Thank you so much, Andy and Rebecca, for joining me today. Now, while we get started here, why don't each of you give me sort of your podcasting origin story? How did each of you get into podcasting?
Sure. I started listening to podcasts, I don't know what year it was, but first podcast I really got into was the Lost podcast with Jay and Jack. I loved that podcast. It incorporated not only their thoughts, but they had a lot of voicemails and they had a lot of feedback that came in for it. And I, at the same time, would be watching Lost with my friends, and I would call them up afterwards watching the show, and we would have these great discussions about theology and philosophy and, you know, big ideas. And we had these great discussions. And I kind of thought, you know, we should be able to record this and put this out because I think other people would love these discussions. It sort of came out of an egotistical thing. Like, we have these really great discussions. I'm sure lots of other people would love to hear it. So
the people need this.
The people need this. So my first kind of diving in point to podcasting was trying to record episodes of our Lost discussions. And so we talked about the season 6 episodes a little bit. After that, ABC rebooted V, and I really wanted to watch that because it had Elizabeth Mitchell in it and she was on Lost. And I was also a big fan of V when I was a kid. So this was very exciting to me. So I brought some friends in. We started talking about V and we did a whole bunch of episodes of that, but then the show got canceled. And then after that, Once Upon a Time started airing. And so that was another opportunity for me to record episodes of my friends and I talking about the episodes.
Welcome to Operation Cobra Podcast, a podcast dedicated to ABC's Once Upon a Time. My name is Rebecca, and since Monica, my usual...
Over the course of the years, I figured out how to record these conversations. I had these apps on my phone that were kind of unreliable, and I didn't like that. And then over the course of time, I started to realize, oh, you can record conversations on Skype, and it made my life so much easier. So I kind of came through it just because I wanted to record conversations with my friends. So that was kind of how I came into it, because I really love to discuss TV and TV episodes. And that's sort of how I came into it, was just wanting to share the conversations that I have with my friends with other people.
You bring up the Once Upon a Time podcast. That's kind of where our stories start to intertwine, because I hosted a different Once Upon a Time podcast, Greetings from Storybroke. Story Brook. And then you hosted Operation Cobra Cast, right?
Yeah, we had a podcast called Operation Cobra Podcast, which was the name of the first mission that Emma and her son Henry had on Once Upon a Time. That was a good experience for me because the Once Upon a Time, there was a group of us that were kind of a bunch of different podcasts who kind of came at the show from a different angle and a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And so it was neat because that was the first experience I had with like a community of podcasters, and we would get together occasionally and all talk about the show. And so I think that has really informed a lot of what I do with Supergirl Radio and with DCTV Podcasts. And I think even Andy and I sort of met through Once Upon a Time podcasting as well, because
oh really?
Yeah, he was I needed a guest because my friend Monica couldn't be on the podcast with me one week, and so he came to chat with me over Skype. And so that's kind of how Andy and I first started our little friendship / podcasting dynamic.
Nice. And, I met Andy when we started, because we did the Once Upon a Time podcast. We stuck with it, unlike you, Rebecca. You dropped off. It's okay.
Well, I kind of went through cancer, Bill.
I guess.
I mean, take a little grace on
slight distraction. Sorry, I came in a little hot there, Rebecca.
I thought I would be the one to spill the tea. But you guys do fine without me.
No, but we kept doing the Once Upon a Time podcast, and Rebecca, had to bow out for other reasons that are totally understandable. We found such success with it that we decided to do a podcast about the series on Fox, Gotham. And I started promoting this months before Gotham premiered on Twitter. And I believe that's where Andy entered my story, right?
Oh, yes. I remember. Okay, so I was I still am hosting the Flash podcast. Yeah. I'm like, it's not over yet. And by that,
not until the crisis.
Okay, so how much tea am I allowed to spill here? Because there is some drama.
A moderate amount of non-mean-spirited tea. It will be allowed to be spilled.
Demands. Oh, good Lord. Okay, so I started listening to podcasting while I was in high school. My first podcast I ever started listening to was the Stargirl's House of L podcast. That was the number one Marvel podcast on the internet. And I got into it during the 9th. I heard about during the 9th season, but then during the final season, I really got into it because I was getting close to then of my high school experience. So it was a year before I was graduating. I was really afraid, to leave high school behind. I was also afraid of leaving Smallville, not having Smallville in my life anymore, because I was 6 years old when I started watching that show. Mm. So I really got into that podcast.
I was in college. Sorry.
Hey, you don't look a day over 29.
I'm not a day over 29. I'm many, many days over 29. Thank you very much.
Lord. After Smallville ended, I went back and listened to all their episodes. And then in 2012, I moved to London for a half year to do a film course at Met Film School. While I was listening, I was listening back to old Shoe Pie and so on. I got involved with a now discontinued podcast network where I would do certain segments with them on their main show, and then I would host. And I pitched them that I wanted to do an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, and we did it for 2 years. And then during those 2 years, as I was finding myself as a podcaster, learning about editing and recording and so on, I also started developing other podcasts. That's why I met Rebecca. She emailed me politely and asked me if I wanted to come on and talk about it. Was a Peter Pan episode. It was a season 3A of Once Upon a Time. Which is actually one of my favorite arcs of the whole series.
Oh, mine too.
Because I just love the idea of a dark Peter Pan. And is it Robbie Joe? Something with Robbie. He was
Robbie K, I think.
Robbie K. Okay. He was just so damn good in that role that we had, me and Rebecca had a really, really good time, and that's how we became friends. And then as I was getting to my second season of the S.H.I.E.L.D. podcast, we heard about the Flash, and I had been dead set on making a Flash podcast. I wanted to do a DC related podcast, but Arrow was already, it was back when Arrow was still good. It was during the second season. I'm like, there's already a lot of Arrow podcasts out there that I kind of just want to do something I can do from the beginning.
I'm Tom Cavanaugh, and you're listening to the Flash Podcast.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Flash Podcast, your podcast for all things related to CW's The Flash, starring Grant Gustin as Barry Allen / The Flash.
And during that season, I also did a podcast for the Tomorrow People, which was a one-season show that I actually didn't finish because I fell off the wagon with that show, and then I'm like, oh, right, I still have the podcast. Delete.
Well, I was going to say, it was only a one-season show, so you're probably not the only one who fell off.
Well, I kind of faded out around episode 13 or 14 or something like that, because I was doing the show by myself because my co-host at the time who was going to do it with me, he dropped out. And then as I got to the end of the second season of S.H.I.E.L.D., I just realized that I just don't have it in me anymore to podcast about the show. S.H.I.E.L.D. is one of my favorite TV shows of all time, and I've been writing about it, covering it so for all the years or so, but I just didn't want to do it in a podcast format anymore. I ended the show, that version of the show, and kind of exited the network. And then I got into the Flash podcast, and that's where Bill comes in, because I was looking forward to Gotham because they kept adding so many characters, so many actors. And I remember thinking, he's doing kind of a similar thing that I'm doing, like a season 0 kind of thing, because that's which has become now a big brand for us at DC Podcast, because all the shows we do, they have their prequel, their year zeros, or season 0, or whatever we can use. DC Comics won't come after us for. So
I don't think for Gotham, I don't think our season 0 was as extensive as what you guys do. I think we basically watched a smattering of Batman the animated series, and then talked about the different promotional documentaries they released in the months leading up to the premiere.
Yeah, I would have done that season 0 much more differently, because that's the thing. No, I mean, I think you guys did it great.
But we do it better, Bill. We do it much better.
I mean, we do.
Well, actually, Andy, just in case the listeners don't understand what you mean by a season 0, why don't you explain it?
In the case of The Flash and Supergirl or Batwoman, for example, we will look at the mythology of the characters that we know will be coming to the show. We will do character spotlights on them. So, we can do character spotlights on Barry Allen, Zor-El, and all the supporting characters that there are. And then also look at some of the significant storylines in the comic that people should check out, and then their past media appearances. And, they kind of give our theories on what we think they will be like on the show. In the case of The Flash, we had such many characters who came from the comics, with Supergirl. Hank Henshaw wasn't really Hank Henshaw.
Right.
Alex Danvers wasn't in the comics, and still isn't for some unexplained reason. And Cat Grant was a lot way different than the one we see in the comics. So
she kind of came out of the Sterling Gates run of the character. So yeah.
Yeah, but
let me talk about Supergirl, Andy.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Called out.
This is what I want to see Rebecca do more of, being a diva. Yeah, so that's kind of what our season 0s are like. And, it's been a good way to kind of connect with fans and listeners and so on who are excited for the shows and kind of want to, we don't where do I start? What do I check out? What other media can I watch? What other TV shows or movies? Or it's a good way for fans to kind of get to know the characters, all to get to know us a whole year in advance.
Yeah, and I would say, and this isn't meant negatively, but from a self-serving standpoint, it's a really good way to sort of build a listenership base before that premiere episode drops and everybody's like, oh my God, I just loved the first episode of The Flash and I need a podcast for it. That way you're there and you're in position, ready to rock their world.
Yeah, and that's something I think I noticed both with, and not to step on Rebecca's toes too much because she will slap me. But when the Flash pilot and when the Supergirl pilot both aired, I remember seeing a big increase in our numbers because even though we had all the fans who were listening to season 0 and so on, there were all those people that you were talking about who would just go on Google, go for Supergirl podcast, Flash podcast. There we would be, and that's why I just to go a little bit about DC podcasts that were elite, is why we always announce the podcast as early as possible so that we can kind of just get everyone ready to kind of build up and so on. Even if the show hasn't even been picked up yet, the series, I'm like, it's going to be fine. It's going to happen. Don't worry. It's going to get picked up.
I heard some guy in line at Comic-Con talk about how he wanted a Blue Devil show, so we're starting the Blue Devil podcast right now.
Yeah, and then DC Universe will cancel it after its pilot has aired like they did with Swamp Thing. Although Blue Devil looked really cool on that show.
Was Blue Devil on Swamp Thing?
Yeah, they introduced his human character in the beginning because he was like, what was it? He was like a stunt performer, like he was like an aspiring actor, and then later in the season, I believe you saw him suit up, but like you did see him like kind of demonstrate some powers.
Nice. All right, so let's go ahead and bring it back to DCTV Podcasts a little bit here. So we have Andy over there doing the Flash podcast. We have Rebecca over there doing the Supergirl radio. And we have me over there doing Legends of Gotham. When does the idea spark to sort of try and start bringing these different DCTV related podcasts together?
Well, I remember because Supergirl Radio was specifically a spin-off from us, because I had never gone into the idea of doing like a full network, because I'm like, there's not going to be that many DC shows all at the same time, right? Good Lord, was I wrong?
Flash forward 5 years, every show on every network is DC.
Right. So yeah, so I kind of like, like I'm enjoying the Flash. I'm really excited about them doing Supergirl. So I should do we could do like a spin-off. And that's where, Rebecca was one of the first people I thought of. She was the first person I thought of, because I remembered watching all the big crossover you guys did with the other Once Upon a Time podcasters.
Well, welcome everybody to the first ever Once Upon a Time roundtable with other Once Upon a Time podcasters. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from Once Podcast, and I'll let the rest of the hosts introduce themselves.
I'm Bill Meeks from Greetings from Storybrooke.
I'm Bree from Other Side of the Mirror.
I'm Jose Caradero from the Storybrooke Herald.
Kawai Take from AfterBuzz TV.
My name's Rebecca Johnson from Operation Cobra Podcast.
And I'm Tiana Hobson from AfterBuzz TV.
Because I for some reason that video was up in my queue for some reason that weekend, and I'm like, oh, I think Rebecca, I think Rebecca is like a big Superman fan or something. This was also before we realized that we were both insanely in love with Man of Steel. So, so I'm like, I think she's a big Superman fan. And that's how I got her. And then I'm thinking, okay, so I'm friends with these great people over at Legends of Gotham, Bill and Anne-Marie. And then I'm also good friends with Michael Amanda from Quiver the Green Arrow podcast. I'm thinking, why don't we just try and work together? Why don't we we could increase our numbers? We could kind of just demonstrate ourselves as an outlet, so that we could do maybe more press things and so on, and kind of help each other build each other up, and kind of be this little umbrella of shows together. And so I remember I spoke to Bill first, because I didn't really need Rebecca's permission. I was like, this is my spin-off. I can do whatever I want with it. So no, I mean, of course I talked to Rebecca, I think we should do that, because she knew Bill and Anne-Marie. I mean, she didn't really object to it.
To her credit, she totally should have. She totally should have.
But I remember I had an excited Skype call with you and Anne-Marie, and kind of talking how could this work? How could we do this? How can we do this where we don't have to move anything? Because we're, for people at home listening to this, we actually do have to pay money to keep these websites and these services up. It's not like we're just edit, record, edit, publish, boom, we're done. We actually have to pay for these servers to exist. But I asked you, what can we do to kind of do this as a network? And Bill was actually the founder of the idea to do a mega feed. I'm like, Bill, how much is it going to cost me? He's like, no, nothing. And he started telling me all this whole idea about, I think you'd pitched me to do rssmix.com, where we took all of our RSS feeds, combined it to one, and then submitted it to iTunes.
Yeah, and then that way there could be just a DCTV podcast entry on Apple Podcasts and stuff.
Exactly. So and that way, people could have this one place. We didn't have to give up the separate feeds. If people only wanted to listen to Gotham, Supergirl Radio, but didn't want to listen to Air on the Flash because Oliver sucks and Barry's just too good to everyone. I get it. But I'm like, okay, this could work. This could really work. So like I started figuring out a name for it, and DC Podcast is kind of the first one I came to. And then I remember, because this is where Supergirl comes in. The day when we announced the network, it's not even half an hour later, they revealed the damn costume. And that's the only thing Twitter would talk about. I'm like, oh, wonderful.
You held that news back for, the optimal time on Twitter where nothing's going on, but so did the CW, or actually it would have been CBS then, right? So yeah, and just drop that news and just completely shat all over your VR announcement.
Well, I didn't know that they were going to announce that week. I mean, the only thing, because back then I didn't have as many like sources or whatever that I do have now. The only thing I ever found out in advance was that Melissa was getting cast as Supergirl. But yeah, that's kind of how we started it all. And then Greg Berlanti got triggered and was like, I'm gonna make all these shows. And now he has a bunch of, now we have a bunch of podcasts about his shows.
Yeah, it's a running joke now that every time a new DC show comes out, we're going to be making a podcast about it. It's just assumed that that's going to happen. So that's like a running joke among our listeners now.
You guys both have other responsibilities outside of the podcast and everything.
We do?
Yeah, probably one or two. I'd imagine.
I thought all Rebecca did was go to the theaters all the time and just rewatch BVS all the time. That's why she could see it so many times.
Well, I wish. I was saying Rebecca had these responsibilities too. She's super lazy, but I didn't want her to feel bad. Andy, you shouldn't bring it up. No, obviously you're both the two hardest working people in podcasting, mostly.
All right. I mean, how can we live up to Conan O'Brien?
Oh yes, the Podfather himself, Conan O'Brien. Okay, but so you guys do have a lot of responsibilities outside of the network, but with all these DC shows that constantly keep getting added, how do you find people to host these shows? Because you can't host all of them, right? Except maybe Andy.
We tried. Yeah. Rebecca was like, I don't want to talk about letters tomorrow. I'm like, not me neither. We none of us really cared about iZombie back then. We were both in love with Krypton, but we were just too busy. Yeah. And then Titans, like, Rebecca promised she was going to commit, but she's like one season behind of everyone else. So,
yeah, I have things that I need to catch up on, but eventually I'll get to Titan season 2.
Yeah, I'm there with you, Rebecca, by the way. I haven't caught up on that yet either.
I mean, for me, like, at least in terms of how Rebecca and I work together on this, it's like, I've gone to her and asked, are there people that that could maybe be a good fit for maybe this podcast or that podcast? And she's introduced me to a couple of people and so on. But other than that, like, what I do is that, and the good thing about the extension of the Arrowverse is that I've been able to gain a lot of friends who are also writers and podcasters and journalists and so on, and kind of like these are people that I would like to listen to. These are people that I think people would really enjoy listening to. So I would reach out to them and kind of pitch them the idea of how we would make this happen, and then if they agreed to it, which they did, we would just bring them on and they would host their show. They would do the season 0. So I've never done like an open audition. I've never put on like a casting description up, here's what we're looking for. Yeah. I think actually I only did it for Supergirl. Actually, back then I didn't know a lot of people, so I asked like one of my friends who she wasn't into podcasting, but she knew like a lot of female content creators. So I'm like, can you like kind of secretly put out a call? There's a DC project in the works, and that's how we found Teresa Giacino, Rebecca's first co-host of Supergirl Radio. But yeah, then I started, Rebecca introduced me to her friend Morgan Glennon, or our friend Morgan Glennon now, and I'm like you should have her on the show more again. And then there came a time where we were able to bring on new hosts, and Morgan came on after I forced Rebecca basically to go after her.
Well, I had known Morgan for a long time. We actually had we joked that we were in the trenches with Smallville fandom for a while, and we were back in the days we were both on LiveJournal. Remember when LiveJournal was a thing?
Oh yeah, I had 2 of them myself. Don't look for them. Don't look for them.
I went to.
But yeah, that's how Morgan and I met a long time ago. And when we were doing our season 0, like Andy had been talking about, we thought we would talk about Smallville since in season 7, Kara Kent, Laura Vandervoort's version of the character came on to the show. And so I thought, well, Morgan's done a lot of interviews and things like that, and she's really funny. So I invited her to come on Supergirl Radio for those season 0 episodes. And when Teresa ended up having to step down from the podcast, I thought about Morgan and another guest I'd had on for season 1, Carly Lane. I invited them to come and be my replacement hosts, if you will. And so I think that's actually really great to have on different guests and different people, because you never know when that might come in handy for them to join you in future episodes or to become a new host. So that was really beneficial for me, because when Teresa stepped down, I was like, okay, I guess I'm by myself now. But I had those contacts from previous discussions and previous podcast episodes, and I knew they would be good co-hosts. So that's how Carly and Morgan jumped into the picture for me.
Yeah, and that's always a good thing to do, is kind of keep these connections, because like you said, you never know what's going to happen. I know for our Once Upon a Time podcast, when we eventually gave it up, there was still another season or 2 left on the show, but we had just kind of fallen out of love with it. And we ended up giving it over to 3 of our listeners who would constantly, send in voicemails, or they would show up, when we would do listener roundtables at the end of seasons and things. These were people we knew were... What's that?
Bob, I remember Bob.
Oh yeah, Bobby, yeah, Bobby Hawk,
yeah.
Bobby Hawk.
Well, I was only on the Bob. I'm on the Bob level. I'm not on Bobby level yet. That first name basis.
Oh, everybody's on the Bobby level. It's the Hawk you have to worry about. It's the Hawk you have to worry about.
No, he has a really cool voice. I just gotta say that.
Oh, absolutely. And I've actually been using him the past couple seasons on The Fakest too, and he just does wonderful character voices.
Knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we should. Okay, wait, go away. Rebecca, how would you feel about getting Bobby on DCTV Podcast?
You can't have Bobby. He's mine.
Show me the document. Show me the receipts.
It's right here. I have it right here.
Oh,
it's a blank piece of paper. It's written in an invisible ink, but it's there, darn it. So we have DCTV Podcasts set up and everything here. That's kind of a machine, you set up the automatic RSS feed to combine all the RSS feeds into one. Everyone's promoting everybody else, playing bumpers, things like this.
Oh, bumpers? We were supposed to do bumpers?
Oh, you didn't do bumpers?
What bumpers? Did I get any bumpers? I only did bumpers when Rebecca told me to do bumpers.
Yeah, we do bumpers on Supergirl Radio. So get your stuff together.
By we, you mean you, because Morgan's like, what's a bumper? Do I even listen to these? Does she even listen to the episodes?
Morgan lets me use her wonderful voice, and she
is wonderful.
That's enough.
Can I just say one more thing about the idea of having guest hosts on? Because what's so funny is that if certain guest hosts do come on and they actually do become main hosts later on, I go back and say that this was your backdoor pilot.
Nice. Like I said, you have this whole system sort of set up to do this whole self-promotional thing with all the podcasts forever in perpetuity. You guys didn't leave it at that. You decided every summer to kind of come together and do something good as a podcasting group. Wait, why don't you guys talk a little bit about the charity streams that you guys have done the past few years?
Well, I remember back when we first did our first one, we raised money for Winship Cancer Institute, which was the institution I actually went through breast cancer treatment in.
Rebecca Johnson here, one of the co-hosts of Supergirl Radio. And behind me is the Winship Cancer Institute.
I first came to Winship in January 2014 as a recently diagnosed stage 3 HER2 positive breast cancer patient, and it quickly became a second home for me. I received infusions every 3 weeks for 7 cycles of chemotherapy. One of Winship's surgeons performed my mastectomy. I was at Winship every weekday morning for 6 weeks for a total of 30 radiation treatments. Over the course of the year, I participated in a fatigue study, and I finished all of my cancer treatment in January 2015. I am glad to say that I am now cancer-free, thanks to the quality care and treatment I received at the Winship Cancer Institute.
Join DCTV Podcasts on Saturday, May 16th
raising money for the Winship 5K so we can help the Winship Cancer Institute continue to provide outstanding care and research new ways to fight cancer.
Winship was where I went to go get my treatments and have my surgery and all of that. And from my memory, that stemmed from Andy having someone in his life who had gone through cancer. And so we thought that that would be a way that we could help raise money just to benefit, both of our personal stories and benefit people who might be going through cancer in the future. Mm-hmm. And so that was how I remember things kicking off. I don't know if you have that same memory.
My good friend Lori, who was we were small friends. She passed away sadly when she went in for her treatment, and because she did from what I remember, she didn't survive the procedure. And I remember I had to find out on Facebook by her friends because people were posting on her wall. So flash forward a few years later. Or maybe a year later, a friend of mine who also one of the hosts of the small podcast that we're talking about, he runs his own network of podcasts, and he would do like these charity events, I think he does just the one, and that's not to diminish what he's doing because I think it's great. It's for children's cancer, and he would bring all his shows together for like a whole day. I'm like, this is kind of cool. We are starting kind of, we were back then we were just developing the Letters Tomorrow podcast. So we had 4 shows at least, Quiver, Flash, Legends, Gotham. So I asked everyone, because back then we were only 8 people. When this was so much easier to do. Hey, what is everyone doing in the end of May after the season finales of all these shows? And we were like, let's do this idea of a live audio stream for almost a whole day. And by a whole day, I almost meant half a day because it was literally because we only had 4 shows. I had to tell everyone you have to be on for 2 hours per show. Yeah. I remember that wasn't Rebecca's favorite year because her internet connection was
it was spotty.
So she and her host, the guest host, she would disappear, and he'd be like, Rebecca? And I would have to unmute myself and be like, so Rebecca had to step away for just a quick second, but I will fill in.
I felt so bad. Yeah, that was not a good technical year for me.
But I remember because I knew about Rebecca's history with cancer, I asked her, what I want you to pick the charity, or pick the organization. And she told me I want Winship. I'm like, well, this is obvious. We gotta go with Winship because they saved you. And we committed to them, and it was so much fun working with them. And after that, I'm kind of like, why don't we just do this every summer? Because I noticed that after that, some of the listeners from everyone's shows started listening to each other's podcasts. Some of the Gotham people came over to us. Some of the Air Flash and Supergirl and Arrow people went over to Gotham and so on. And I'm like, we should just do this every season. And at first I was like, we should do this once in summer and once during around Christmas. And yeah, that didn't happen because we got too many shows. And then we also have the annual crossovers to do. So we don't got the time for it.
Well, I think something that you guys did, which probably helped a bit with that cross-pollination of the audiences, was at the end of the stream, it was 2 or 3 hours of just everybody getting in and talking together. So, even if someone didn't necessarily watch Gotham, they probably got exposed to my silliness from that last couple hours. Or if someone didn't watch Supergirl, they got exposed to Rebecca's clever, witty banter, in that last 2 hours.
And we're live at mixer.com/DCTV Podcast. Welcome to the assembly show of the DCTV Podcast Network, featuring several favorite hosts of your favorite DCTV Podcast shows. I'm one of your hosts, Andy B. I'm one of the producers and hosts of the Flash Podcast. I'm one of the moderators of the DCTV Podcast Network. And with me is a bunch of awesome people. So let's go in order, and let's also go in an order where Andy doesn't forget certain hosts like last year. So first up, from Legends of Gotham, which is the ones that he did forget last year, Bill Minks and Anne-Maurice DeSimone. How you guys doing tonight?
We're good. How are you?
I'm doing
absolutely fantastical. Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing marvelous. I'm doing marvelous.
Yeah, it was back in the day when we didn't know about her obsession with Google Docs. That would have become if we'd known about it, it would have become such a good running gag so much earlier, because it wasn't until Morgan kind of there's 12 pages here. I'm like, I'm like, Morgan, you're kidding. Like, it's not 12 pages. Like, no, Rebecca's actually made 12 pages long document. I'm like, what?
Look, anytime you come on Supergirl Radio, you're going to know what we're going to discuss, and you're going to be very familiar with it because the Google Docs are very thorough. That's just my goal, so that you're never in question about what's going on. And a 12-page document is actually very short, so be thankful for 12 pages.
Okay, so
you know what they say: 90% of production is pre-production. So
that's true. That's true. Preparation.
I like that. But those 3 hour, the finale shows was always so much fun. And also, like, I want to just make something very clear to your listeners, Bill. Bill and Anne-Marie were integral to this DC podcast from the very beginning all the way till their show ended. Like Bill is selling himself short right here, right now, because he was someone I could always go to when I needed to brainstorm, when I needed to ask a fellow podcast, like, you know, like, I don't know how to do this and so on. So like Bill was just as Bill is and Anne-Marie are part of the heart that is DC podcast. So he's being humble. He's being modest. He's not he wants to put a spotlight on me and Rebecca, but he's just as integral to this story as everyone else is in the foundation of DC podcasts.
So the check came, right? The check came. Perfect.
Rebecca will send it here. She loves. It's gonna be like a 12-inch long check. Just like her Google Doc, she likes to overcompensate.
The bigger.
Yeah,
but it's I like to have a very detailed tear-off receipt for you too.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. But Rebecca, you would agree, right? Like Bill and Anne-Marie were so. I don't think we would have done the network without them, because we wanted to have a network with a lot of people in the beginning.
Well, I think you can speak to it better about how Bill and Anne-Marie have helped on the technical side of things. But for me, their influence can be found in the way we build community, I think. A lot of that I learned from the Once Upon a Time roundtables that we did, but a lot of it I learned from Bill and Anne-Marie when they would do Legends of Gotham. So a lot of the way that they incorporated listeners and the feeling of community, I think they did really well. And that's something I'm really passionate about for Supergirl Radio. And I think that's something we as a podcast network do really well. So I'm really proud of that. And I think that is in a large part an inspiration from Legends of Gotham. And even back when they were doing Greetings from Storybrooke. So for me, their contribution really stemmed from building that community.
Thank you, Rebecca. You said as much publicly on Twitter, and it always does my heart nice to know that, you know, some sort of positivity came from all that silliness that we did over those few years.
Well, I've been in fandoms where it was just awful. Like you never wanted to talk to other people because people would just squabble and fight and say bad things about each other. And it would make me feel like I didn't even want to enjoy the show anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't even want to care about these stories and these characters because the fans were so terrible. And so what I've really been enjoying from that influence that you all did so well is that you incorporated everybody. You made sure everybody had a voice. And that's something I'm really passionate about. Even if there are emails or tweets or something that come in that I don't agree with at all, I will make sure that those voices are heard because they are part of the community and part of the fan engagement. And the listeners who listen to us every week, loyally tune in every week to listen to Supergirl Radio. I feel like that's something that we as a community can really build each other up and help each other enjoy the show. Because we've had a lot of people like write in or tell us like, you know, Supergirl, the show is not that great, but I really love listening to Supergirl Radio. And those are the things that make me really happy is that we've provided a place where everybody, no matter what you think about the show, you have a place on Supergirl Radio and DCTV Podcasts.
You know, that was something that I always thought was very important about doing Fancast was that you have tons of people with tons of differing opinions on the show listening to your show. And you have to make sure that they feel like their opinions are heard and not being disrespected.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, how many listeners are you going to have if you know, shit all over, you know, X theory or Y opinion about X episode for months on end? You're going to eliminate anyone who even cares to listen to you.
Yeah.
The thing is, too, you know, opinion is such a personal thing that if you're gonna, you know, knock someone out of contention of being involved in your show just because they have a certain opinion, then why do you even have a show anyway? Why aren't you just, sitting across from a friend who agrees with you on everything and, just having it just for you? If you're making it for a wider audience, you need to make sure to respect that audience and listen to that audience.
I think that level of respect is why the fundraisers have been so successful, is because the people who listen to our podcasts in the network, they feel connected to the podcasts that we do. They feel like it's a personal thing, that they are connected to the shows and the hosts. And I feel this way too when I listen to podcasts. I feel like, the people on the podcast are like my friends. They're intimately in my earbuds every day. And so I feel like that we're best pals. And so I think that that's why when we say, hey guys, we're going to have a fundraiser after the finales air, come and join us and hang out in the chat room and donate some money to a great charity and a great cause. Those listeners want to come and be part of that experience because they have found a good experience with our podcast when we're just talking about the shows or we're talking about the comics or whatever it is. They have such a good experience there that they want to also contribute to what we're doing to raise money for a good cause. And so I think all of that goes hand in hand with building that community.
Some of my favorite podcasting moments were things that we did that weren't even for the recorded episodes that we would release every week. We would do these, hangouts for our patrons where we would, hop on and, play some games or just talk about random, movies and TV and bullshit like that. Or we'd hang out in the chat room for 20, 30 minutes after we were done live streaming the show. Just things like that to where they feel like you're their friend because you are their friend.
Right.
Normally it's a one-sided conversation as a podcaster, but it's always so nice to find those moments and those opportunities to where you can have it be a two-way conversation instead.
Right.
That's something that you were talking about, the idea that if we just wanted to have someone that would just agree with everything that we're saying all the time, then, and that's what I always say about specifically on the Flash podcast, because, with some of the shows that we cover, we do have, fandoms that are very, very passionate. And they do have their own theories and their own speculation, their own preferences of characters or ships. And and here's the thing, people know, and Rebecca knows as well as I do, that I will drag some ships that I don't like, but not to be a mean-spirited person, but just kind of be like, hey, let's just kind of, because, or this week's episode of Arrow was very odd because all the focus about was Oliver and Felicity, my OTP for life. My way of saying, okay, for me, I don't like this couple. It's not for me. But if you like this relationship, you're 100% entitled and allowed to. And I'm not going to judge you for it. I'm not going to disrespect you. But as long as we can have a good conversation back and forth and not attack each other or send each other pictures of dead birds when Black Canaries killed off. So for me, community is so integral to any podcast that we do. And and that's, like Rebecca said, fundraiser events is, we can have we sometimes have maybe 60, 70 people in the live chat, and they're all talking about the show and what they like and what they don't like, and they're so respectful for each other. Not only is it a crossover for us as the podcast, because we don't get to work with each other every week, but when we do get together, we also get to bring the fans together, and it's just such a rewarding experience to see them just being like, what, I don't like the same thing you like, but what, I'll respect you for it.
I'll say too, my friend Tom Merritt always says that you get the chat room you deserve.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think if there's any sort of respectfulness in your chat room, it probably speaks a lot to you guys as podcasters too, and the way you approach your shows. You don't grow a respectful chat room out of a podcast that is disrespectful to the show creators, the listeners, each other. So I think it's definitely a great reflection on you guys. One thing I'd like to ask you guys before we wrap up here. Just because, fan casting is a very particular discipline.
I thought you were about to say, it's a particular set of skills. I'm like, what? Yes, it is, Liam Neeson.
Yes, you require a particular set of skills. You have to be able to watch an episode 4 times in a row and take notes.
It's true.
Very true. Very true. The thing that kind of got to me about it, and maybe why I fell out of love with it a little bit, is that as much as you work as you put into the podcast, as much as you love your community of listeners, at the end of the day, you're never going to have complete control of your show because it's about a show that somebody else is making. So what do you guys do, even on a temporary basis, when you sort of fall out of love with the show, even if it's for an episode or for a moment in an episode, to kind of keep that ball in the air? And when do you decide, okay, it's too much and maybe I just need to stop doing the show?
I know for me, there's been times with The Flash where, and it was particularly around season 3 and 4, where because, specifically in season 4, I remember there was, Rebecca, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a change in management that for our 2 shows that we were covering with a former producer, and it kind of cast a little dark cloud over them and there was in general for at least a few months, because it kind of felt so weird, having shown respect to this person on air, been an admirer of theirs off air and at Comic-Con and so on. And for me, I remember, and I don't know how you felt about it, Rebecca, but I remember I kind of wanted to step away, but to say that I kind of felt like, well, why should I punish all these talented people who are involved with The Flash, all the great writers, all the great other producers who did behave and did follow the rules and did not abuse their power, for all the actors and all the people in Vancouver, all the people who work 18-hour days putting together these amazing shows that we're watching. They were 18 days for 6 days per week at least. They get maybe one day off every week, and I'm like, why should I punish them when it was one person who messed up? But yeah, there's definitely times where I'm like, I don't tonight. I don't want to get on air. I don't want to record. But you know what? I love my co-host so much, and I love the listeners and the fans so much that I'm like, you know what? I can still address my criticism because, at the end of the day, I'm also a journalist. I want to stay by my truth. But I can also maybe scale down a little bit and be like, instead of going, Oliver Queen is a piece of trash, and just go, well, Oliver Queen is a piece of trash that I don't necessarily connect to as a viewer. But if anyone likes to enjoy this piece of trash, that's perfectly fine with me. Yeah? Oh my god! So there's ways of still doing the podcast, even if there are times, at least for me, where I just feel like I didn't like this episode. Yeah, so it is definitely a challenge, but I think that for me, I just want to get together with my friends and record and have fun. Even if it's an episode I don't like, I just want to have fun with them because we can actually sometimes find ways of finding ourselves laughing. So when Rebecca was talking about, maybe there was a listener or someone who said, I don't enjoy Supergirl right now. I didn't enjoy Supergirl this week, but I really love your podcast and I want to listen to you and Morgan talk, laugh, play Baltimore Ballroom, snap judgment and so on, because I love the show so much. That's how I feel. I listen to Supergirl Radio every week. Rebecca and Morgan are hilarious. They're talking about hope. And not hope as in hope as in AI thing that is on right now. So yeah, it's challenging, but I think by not committing to what you started, I kind of feel like you're letting the negativity punish the people around you that you're doing the show with.
Yeah, for me, I think I have a long-winded couple of answers. So one of the reasons I keep going is because I did quit that Once Upon a Time podcast, and I'm determined not to quit this one. I'm not going to be a quitter on this one. But and a more personal reason, that I remember there was one night someone had said something awful about me that I thought was just somebody on Facebook. Somebody I didn't know, and somebody who has never spent a day with me, has never talked with me at all, but said the most heinous thing somebody has ever said about me. And to be totally transparent, it broke me. I cried. I ugly cried about it. I called my mother. It was horrible. And that night I was supposed to get on the mic with Morgan and talk about Supergirl. And for a split second, I thought, I have had the worst day. And I don't think I can get in front of a microphone and talk about the show tonight. I just don't think I can do it. And then my mind turned a corner because I remembered how much Morgan makes me laugh. Mm-hmm. And I got on Skype with her and I told her what had happened, and she completely understood, and she was such a good friend about it. And then when we talked about the episode, I just had the best time. And it completely, I'm trying not to cry, but it completely changed my attitude, and it completely changed my perspective on that day. And I think for me, one of the things that I've learned from Morgan is that there was also another night when I got on Skype with her. And right before that, I had watched an episode of Superstore on NBC, and I laughed and I had a good time when I watched it. And so when I got on Skype, I guess I sounded different because I was happier. And she said something about it. She was like, "Oh, you sound very excited about something." And I was like, "Do I not normally sound like that?" And so I just realized how much podcasting had it had changed me somehow, because it had made me think about my perspective and made me think about what I was doing, how I wasn't laughing enough, how I was taking other people's personal attacks on me way too seriously. And so there's something about podcasting, especially being on, I have to give so much credit to Morgan because she's been such a good friend. She's stuck with me for several years now, and she's been so good to be wanting to talk to me about Supergirl and about the show. And we have such a good time, and I hope she feels the same way. But I think that has really taught me a lot about myself. And I think another reason that I want to keep podcasting is because, and why I push through some of the bad episodes, because there have been episodes of the show I have not cared for.
Well, we've all seen your post, Rebecca.
Oh, the God episode.
So there have been complete seasons I was not crazy about. But I have now, over the course of the last 4 years, I've become so connected to the character of Supergirl, not only through the show, but in diving deep into season 0 and looking at all her comics and looking at the TV shows and the movies that have been made. And I just feel such a personal connection to the character that I want to see her through. And even when the show ends, I want to keep talking about Supergirl because I think she's a character worth talking about. So I think that those things combined push me through, push me through onto the next thing, because I have such a love for the character. I have such a love for the podcast, for our listeners, for my co-hosts, that this has been the most rewarding podcast experience that I've had, even though I've done a lot of other podcasting projects. The Supergirl Radio came out. Andy had asked me, I remember, I didn't talk about this earlier, but I guess it sort of connects, but I had finished, I was about to finish all of my cancer treatment in January 2015 is when the cutoff was when it was finished. Andy approached me about Supergirl Radio in November 2014, if I remember. And I remember thinking, Rebecca, you had a lot of stress that went along with that Once Upon a Time podcast, and it was just a lot of work. And I don't know if I want to get into that again, but then I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? This is a fresh start. I beat cancer. I'm going to try this again. And I think this has been such a good way for me to value not only my life and, the days that I've gotten, but I've been able to share those experiences with other people on a global scale. When people listen to us, they're listening to us. Yeah. I mean, we don't have huge numbers, but we have a loyal audience around the globe.
We have good numbers. I'm actually going to pull up the country to listen to us while you talk, just because I like to brag about ourselves.
But I just think about how things I can share with people. I have this opportunity now where I have a platform where I can share my experience with people, and maybe that will benefit someone else. So even if I sometimes don't like the show, even if I don't like the choices that they make in the writing, I get to have a positive experience with Morgan. I get to share that experience with the listeners. And we've ended up doing some really good things with those charity fundraisers that we do. So it has been a more positive experience than I went in thinking it would be. And I think that's just from the people I've surrounded myself with. So I've been really thankful for that.
It is, really rewarding, even through all those bad days, and I can relate to Rebecca, getting attacked, being dragged out of the zone, just because we have opinions, because like in the end, the reason we criticize is because we do love our show so much. Like if I didn't love The Flash, I wouldn't say, no. Like if we didn't care as much as we do, we wouldn't say these things. So it's like we get criticized for hating or being not real fans. That's always been one of my biggest statements. What anyone I bring onto the network, it's like, look, don't you ever feel that you can't speak your truth. Don't ever feel like you need to hold yourself back if you really feel passionate about something. If you really, really feel upset with how, for example, a show is handling representation, go on air and speak your truth. If you're upset with how they're treating your main character, whose name is in the title of the show, you get your ass on air and you tell your truth. At the end of the day, the truest fans are those who can, first of all, speak as it is, but also be respectful about it, because you will never hear me and Rebecca go after a writer or an actor or a producer being like, I want to drag their offense because they didn't give me A, B, and C with this character or with this story and so on. Now, there's the Laura Lance incident, but that's because that was just dumbass as hell. A Green Arrow TV show should never kill off Black Canary. But you know what? It's okay. Mark Guggenheim, your show is almost over. But yeah, it's all about showing passion in a good way, but also making sure that you don't create a negative space, because otherwise you're just like any troll on internet.
Yeah, you got to be respectful with it. And podcasting is a really tough thing, live especially, but even recorded, just because you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your intellect, your opinions out there. It's a very vulnerable position. And, when... Especially
live, like you said.
Yeah, especially live. And, when trolls run in like that, it feels like almost like a betrayal. Because, you're trying to be the most honest version of yourself and represent yourself in the best way. And then, someone can come in and just, kind of shit all over it. But at the same time, I think it also opens you up to so many positive experiences, that vulnerability, because your listeners see that and they know that. And they feel like they know you because of that. And it can become a much deeper connection than... someone who's listening to the Podfather, Conan O'Brien, who doesn't necessarily feel connected to him.
Well, what's so funny is that, you were talking about putting yourself out there. I remember I did it in the season finale last year of the Flash podcast, because there was a character on the show who he was losing his intelligence, so he wasn't able to really function anymore. And I remember I spoke about, like when I had my autism at the worst, I couldn't speak. I didn't know how to speak. I could only make noises and sounds and so on. And like the idea of being trapped inside your own mind was so terrifying, because that was something that happened for me for 3 years before I started really forming myself and so on. And I had this, and I feel so shitty that I never emailed her back. But I had this great mother email me and tell me about her child who has Asperger's or autism, and kind of asked me like, what can I do to be a supportive figure for him? What can I do? And it was a very long email. And I feel so crappy that I never responded to it, because it came at a time where I was in a very bad position in my life. But like when you put your heart out there and you see people like really not only giving it back to you, but also giving a little piece of themselves to kind of be like, you're not alone. That's the magic of television, of these TV shows that we get to cover, is that not only you get, for example, I have friends now that will be able to call friends for life. Rebecca and I, we are going to have so much to do, even like after Flash is over, Super is over, and so on. We talk about doing commentaries for Man of Steel or Batman vs Superman or that one, or the real one, if it ever comes.
Release the Snyder Cut.
# release the Snyder's Cut.
# release the Snyder Cut. I'm so blessed to get to have that. People like her and everyone else on DC Podcast that were in my life, but also just because we were all fans who want to talk about a TV show we all love.
Great commentary here, guys. I really think, at the end of this conversation, I think we've all learned that the real DCTV podcast were the friends we made along the way.
That's right.
Yes.
And that's where we'll cut it, and that'll be the end of the episode, and it'll be perfect. Thanks for listening to the show. If you have your own big idea you've made a reality, we want to hear about it. Let us know by emailing imadethis@doanything.media. We'd love to share your project, or maybe even talk to you about it. You can follow the show at I Made This Show, all one word, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, that's at I Made This Show. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or on our website, imadethis.doanything.media. Again, that's imadethis.doanything.media. And if you do subscribe, make sure you leave a review so we can shout you out on the show. I'm Bill Meeks. Thanks for listening.